An uneasy peace between China and Taiwan has existed for more than 70 years. That peace is now under unusual strain. Taiwan is a self-governed island of 24 million people with a thriving democracy. But the Chinese Communist Party claims that it's part of China, which is why when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of America's House of Representatives, visited Taiwan, China flexed its military muscles.
There's a real collapse in trust, and it's a really dangerous moment.
Tensions are high. The question is, will it lead to war?
It's really striking how the last few years, in places like Washington and other capitals, there is a new sense of urgency about how soon Chinese communist leaders, particularly Xi Jinping, could feel they have no choice but to use force in some way to take Taiwan back. War over Taiwan cannot possibly be inevitable. If you're Chinese and you think you can do it another way, you've got to want to do it without fighting, because it would be unbelievably costly to so much that China has built up over the last decades of economic prosperity. It would also be unimaginably dangerous. If you think the Ukraine crisis is scary, remember that Joe Biden made clear on day one that American soldiers were never going to fight Russian soldiers. That's not the case in Taiwan. There are plenty of realistic scenarios that on day one of a Taiwan war, the American military would have to sink Chinese ships as they tried to invade Taiwan, that the Chinese Air Force might have to bomb American fighter jets sitting in Japanese Air Force bases. That is very, very close to a regional, if not a world war, and they're nuclear superpowers. It should be utterly unthinkable. Why is it not unthinkable? Because if you're the leader of the Chinese Communist Party and you look at Taiwan, the problem that you have is that time works in two very different ways. With every passing year, China's military gets stronger and the Taiwanese military gets weaker, and China's ability to keep America at bay looks more impressive. So that could be a reason to be patient, to think, well, why rush? Why take a risk of a war that we could lose? But the passage of time also works another way, which is with every passing year, hearts and minds of the people of Taiwan, particularly young people in Taiwan, they become less and less interested in being run from Beijing by the Communist Party. Fewer and fewer Taiwanese think of themselves as Chinese in any meaningful sense. There are worst case scenarios where China could feel it had no choice but to stop Taiwan from declaring independence or drifting away, where Xi Jinping, a man with a very strong sense of his own destiny, could feel, I have to do this before I step down. And that really worries leaders and generals in the West. I was talking to an American official who studied this crisis for years, and he said the problem is we've never seen this level of military buildup, this level of nationalism not end in a conflict. We shouldn't pretend that every American has strong views about the future of Taiwan, but in certain key places, above all Congress in Washington, Democrats and Republicans who don't agree on much, they agree that Taiwan is a plucky, pro-American, pro-Western democracy that deserves to be protected from the communist bully next door. And that's a very powerful bipartisan message. And there is less pressure on the administration to do more to help Taiwan, pressure that China sees as a hostile, offensive move. And so the American foreign policy elite, the American political classes, they are more pro-Taiwan than we've seen for a very long time. And that is a very destabilizing situation. Here's the danger. Taiwanese public opinion is remarkably calm in the face of this crisis. And one of the things we've heard during the Nancy Pelosi visit is, why is the Western media so up in arms about this? We Taiwanese are so calm, we don't get fussed about these attacks. China makes too much money in Taiwan to ever do something stupid like start a war. That's a really common line to hear in Taiwan. But actually, there are plenty of people in America who think that it's really possible that these threats are real and that they could have to fight a war. There is no way that Americans can care more about Taiwan's safety than the Taiwanese do. So if there is a sense in America that Taiwanese public opinion is actually complacent and that young Taiwanese are just not interested in looking after themselves, in joining the army, in doing real national service, then I think you could see support for Taiwan start to waver. I am really struck in my time as a China correspondent. It used to be that grown-up, sophisticated ambassadors, senior officials in governments like the American government who had access to the most classified intelligence, if you asked them, could there be a war over Taiwan? Not that long ago, the kind of the sophisticated, knowing thing to say was, of course not. It's unthinkable. The stakes are too high. China knows it's too dangerous. And now I hear very different messages. It's, maybe, and maybe quite soon, maybe before the end of this decade. And there's a real soberness about how dangerous the stakes are and how the two sides are absolutely convinced that the status quo is being undermined by the other. And there is a real collapse in trust, and it's a really dangerous moment. I'm David Rennie, Beijing Bureau Chief for The Economist. If you'd like to read more of our coverage of China and Taiwan, please click the link. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.